boss, how would you have people measure performance? If you had to condense performance into one or two or three statistics for parsimony, what would they be?
So I think I'm going to have to challenge the question and say, like, when you start out saying, if you had to condense performance into a single summary metric, and that's where I say you can't. That's the problem. You can't condense it into a metric. So for us, and I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but it doesn't condense into a metric because they all behave differently, right? I go with the easiest example is if you're just short out of the money puts, right? Your metric is a high sharp. You get a high sharp. You get incredible alpha, right? And then suddenly you blow up, right? So it all has to be in context. That's the point, right?
I agree.
And,
so what about portfolio sharp, right? Like
so portfolio sharp.
If you put these funds together, or if you weight these funds optimally, even though the individual constituents may not have high Sharpe ratios, and we may have some nonlinear strategies in there, the portfolio Sharpe ends up being very high. So Is that a reasonable place to go? Or at least start?
Sure. So that's something that Rod touched on a moment ago, which is that the different parts are meant to offset each other. And that's where I love that. I think you guys are there too in the way you design your portfolios. That's where I start from, is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? You could have a negative returning thing in there, i.e. long puts next to your long equities. And people say, well, but you're losing money on that piece of your portfolio every month. Yes, and I'm really excited to lose that money because it's going to save my equity downturn, right? And so that's the point, is the whole is greater than the sum. So to that point, if you have a portfolio that in context is well balanced, right? And you could kind of see that in the portfolio skew, right? Years ago, and when I started out sharing my background, where I had built a long vol book offsetting to a market neutral book, right? So the market neutral book, they always look good and high Sharpe until the negative skew event. So sticking a long vol book next to it, you kind of ate away at, let's just say, 5-10 bips of return every month. But then that 1 month that market neutral was down 8, it's actually still up 60 bips, right? Because the long vol kicked in. So that made the total portfolio distribution more symmetric, right? And that's how I looked at it. I said, over here I've got a right skew, over here I've got a left skew, and I layered on all these distributions on top of each other. And then the portfolio distribution looked as normal as could be. And that got me excited, not because I believed it was truly a normal distribution, but because I knew that the parts were summarized to create something that was more reliable, and where the deviations would be what we would expect, because it had offsetting pieces inside. In that place, you could use a Sharpe. You could use an alpha and a beta. But now you want to ask, who is being so thoughtful to have that kind of portfolio all the time that you could just assume that that's been done? And so that's the problem, is why you can't start with a metrics. First, you got to find out is what's inside their book. And then based on that, now what metrics can I use? So that goes back to my answer, is there's no one for all. There's what do you do and how do you do it? What's inside? How are you generating your alpha? Where's your sources of vol? Now let me decide what metrics to use. All that aside, I like to see the most information possible. I like to work with the total distribution. That's what tells me the most. Look at the shape of the distribution of what you're doing, and I can quickly tell whether you're long vol or short vol, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and therefore what metrics might be worse or better.